Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Do you have any things you need to get done around the house? Maybe some special projects? Check out K&H Construction. Chris Helms out of Waxahachie. He's a local. Take care of you. Let him know DV LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest is Mr. David Cook, who is running for Senate District 22, Texas Senate District 22, which covers Ellis County and beyond. How you doing, Mr. Cook?
I'm doing great. About yourself, DV?
I'm good. I'm very grateful that you came on. And like I tell all the candidates that come on here, thank you for wanting to serve, in your case, continue to serve your community in this rough and tumble thing that could be politics. I know it's difficult on the family. It's difficult on everything, yet you want to serve your community. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and you're very accurate. It's unfortunately nowadays it is a full contact sport, and it's one thing to have opinions about me, but it is much more difficult when people attack your family and things like that. It's totally uncalled for, but it's part of it nowadays. And I just try to follow the golden rule, right? Just do as and others as you would have them doing to you, and try to be a good example, and just focus on what what we can do, what we can impact, and the other stuff will take care of itself.
Yeah, I never knew, this is why I stick on this side of it and just interview candidates and stuff, because I never knew how much I know you love your family like I love mine, and that stuff makes you go grrr,
Yes.
But there might be people who don't know you in Ellis County, and I wanted to have you on for that and to ask you all kinds of questions about stuff. But can you go ahead and give it a quick intro on yourself?
Sure, you bet. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. And again, appreciate the invitation to be on with you today, and
Thank you.
And appreciate you being a conduit to to the people. So, but yeah, just a little bit about me. I grew up here in Mansfield, been here all my life. I was born in a hospital in Fort Worth, but lived in Mansfield my whole life. Other than when I moved off to college, I went to Stephen F. Austin State University out in the big city of Nacogdoches, Texas, East Texas. But like I said, grew up here in Mansfield, and Mansfield really, the Mansfield that I grew up in really reminds me a lot of Senate District 22. The district is made up of 12 counties. I know you know that, but just kind of for purpose of the audience that may or may not be familiar, the district starts up at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in the Euless area, and comes down the eastern half of Tarrant County, the eastern side of Tarrant County into Mansfield, Grand Prairie, then of course over to Ellis County, and then down to Falls County and McLennan County, and then it continues to go to the west out to the city or the county of Eastland, and so it's 12 counties total. And what I was you and I were talking about a little bit off air before about my service as mayor prior to running for the House. I got elected in 2008 as mayor, and in 2020 is when I ran for the House, which means I started serving in the House in January of 2021. But during my time as mayor, I actually, represented, the Mansfield residents that were in Ellis County. So Mansfield is a little bit unique in that it's made up of 3 counties, primarily Tarrant County, but also has portions of Ellis County and Johnson County as well. And there's a lot of growth that's left in Mansfield to build out is in the Ellis County portion and Johnson County portions of the city of Mansfield. So it was a great opportunity to help color the canvas of Mansfield, the city that I grew up in, and just, have an opportunity to play a part in that. And, I felt like we did a lot of good things during that time period. And this, the city is continuing to grow. I think it just eclipsed 90,000 people. And, the city is continuing to work on the sales tax base, which was a focus that we had while I was there. And, the benefit there is that, the more sales tax base you can get, the home tax, the homeowners, taxpayers, and those commercial properties, they will start to feel that benefit from a property tax perspective. It's a long-term plan. But yeah, so married to, my wife is Tanya. We have a blended family of 4 children, adult children, I should say. And we have 7 grandchildren and 1 on the way.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. We have 6 granddaughters and only 1 grandson they all call me Cookie. And Trip is the grandson, and he's always wants to make sure that he's the favorite grandson. And of course, he's the favorite one all the time. So yeah, anytime we're not doing, work, campaign or otherwise, that's our focus is, spending time with family, that being our adult children. My parents live here in Mansfield, and then of course our grandkids. 3 of the grandkids live here in Mansfield. two live in Ellis County, and then two live up in the Grapevine area, northern part of Tarrant County. So we're blessed in that regard. They're all fairly close, and gives us an opportunity to get together as a family. Not often enough, but more often than some folks where the grandkids live halfway across America. So
Right.
blessed. Yeah.
So like my kids and where my mom is, it's a long way, she's still in California, so
Got it.
it's easy to get to see those grandkids enough. But that's a beautiful thing, all these different generations, and God bless you for still having those parents. God bless.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful thing, to have them around. But
It's a
and
blessing.
we won't let the other grandkids know that grandson's the favorite. But what made you want to run for the Senate district? I mean, that you got in the House and you got to see a little bit of that, and now you're going in, and the Senate is a whole lot different. We're going to talk about that, but what made you want to run for that?
Yeah, I think just feeling like I can can take the next step, and obviously we can get into it as you like, but the Senate, you represent more people, have a bigger voice to represent. We all can do the easy math. There's 31 senators in Texas, and there's approximately 31 million Texans, and so each Senate district is made up of about a million people. Whereas in the House, you represent closer to 200,000 people, 150 House members, and so you represent about 200,000 people, and really just feel like the experience that I've gained both as a local mayor on a city council and then in the House, feel like those have prepared me for for a time such as this, and my wife and I really prayed about it, and just felt like this was the next step for us to take, and we made that announcement on June 30th and haven't looked back, and just been working hard for the last 7 months, trying to make it a reality.
I imagine you've been pounding the pavement a lot, and there's a lot of different places you got to go to. That it's a huge area you got to cover. You're getting some serious miles in, sir. Oh,
Yes, sir. We just have a vehicle that's a year old and just eclipsed 30,000 miles on it this past week. So yeah, we're lots of windshield time. My wife, I'm blessed in that regard as well. Tanya travels with me definitely back and forth to Austin. During session, she's been able to to travel back and forth with me, and which it makes it a whole lot more doable to continue to do life together while we're serving in the legislature, where not everyone has that opportunity. So we feel blessed to have that. So she's a big part of the campaign, and whether she's with me or representing me somewhere, when you have to be in two places at one time. But I'm I couldn't do what I'm doing without my bride, for sure.
that is awesome. That because we can't do nothing without their support. First of
Right.
all, we can't do nothing without God, but we definitely can't do it
First.
without their support. That especially the spouse. I've been with my spouse a long time. 28 years, and yeah, she doesn't do politics, so you won't see me running. She definitely will not be doing politics. That's not her thing. So
That's understandable.
definitely, it's nice to have her with you. But what drives you? What are your ethics?
Yeah, I mean, what drives me is, future generations. We talked about my grandkids earlier, and my our kids. That's really what drives me when people ask you, why would you take all this time and do all this, work, and do all that you do. It's certainly not for the money. Most people know, or some people know, that the salary for for a state legislator is $600 a month. So it's certainly not for that. And but I think what drives me is results. I mean, that's kind of what puts fuel in my tank, is when you're able to to have an impact and do what you need to do for your constituents. Passing bills takes relationships in Austin, and because what I learned very quickly, and simple math will tell you, if you're one of seven on a city council, you only need three other people to agree with you. But if you're one out of 150 House members, then you need 75 other people to agree with your principle at a minimum to get it out of the House. And you have to have at least 16 senators to agree, and then you have to have the governor agree and sign and that sort of thing. But so that's really what I what drives me is is taking a problem, working with the person or persons or the organizations that brought it to you, and with any stakeholders that want to participate, and finding and crafting a solution that fits the problem, and making it happen. Getting it implemented, and seeing it through. That's really what, for this job, that's what drives me, puts fuel in the tank, so that I it motivates me to continue on. And, in my second term, in my first term, I passed, just under 10 bills. And then my second term, we filed, I believe it was 76 bills, passed 41 of those bills, and 25 of them became law. But, by the governor signing them into law. But so, things like that, to where you're actually being productive, is what drives me to continue to do what have been doing and what I would like to do in the future if the voters see it that way.
In the way that you look at government, in principle, is the proper role of government in the lives of the average Texan?
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that we're dealing with the essentials. That's what, we as the Republican Party, the conservative wing, we want less government, we want less regulations, but we need reasonable regulations to make sure, we have law and order. That's something that I've worked a lot on is backing the blue and law and order. That started with my time as a local mayor. I worked very well with our police officers and our firefighters, and had their support at the very beginning of my first election back in 2008. And so I've always worked well with them, and whether it's passing bills that protects them or that helps them do their job, or that's obviously laws that are meant to protect society as a whole. Those are things that I really have worked on during my 3 sessions.
When it comes to law enforcement, since you went into the topic, when it comes to law enforcement, one of the big things that are part of law enforcement here in Texas, it's had to be, is now we're kind of wading into the immigration debate. And during the Biden administration, Governor Abbott and you guys, in the legislature, you guys had to do a lot of things to try to curb what was like a flood over that border. Texas continues to take a role in that. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you like to see?
Yeah, I would say that, you hit the nail on the head. Obviously, as we talked about, I've been in the legislature for now 3 terms, and my third session was far different than my first 2, because obviously the first 2 were 2021 and 2023, which was when President Biden was presiding, and it's like you said, it wasn't kind of like a flood, it was a flood of people literally coming across the border. And as Texans, in the state legislature, we were having to take on the responsibility of the federal government. And in my first session in 21, we allocated $5 billion to Operation Lone Star. In my second session in 2023, we allocated and dedicated $6 billion. So fortunately, that money should be coming back to Texas now. It was part of the one big beautiful bill where the state of Texas is to be reimbursed for those expenses that we incurred. And I certainly want to applaud Governor Abbott and his leadership in Operation Lone Star, what he was able to accomplish as governor on a problem that should have been taken care of by the federal government. But not only was it not being taken care of by the federal government, it was being caused, by our federal government. And so I was very involved, from my first session, and I've served on criminal jurisprudence all 3 terms of my time in the legislature. And so it's given me an opportunity to work with the issues that impact our border, and it's been a huge priority for me, and will continue to be. And what happened in the third session is that the need at the border came to a screeching halt. But at that point, then we had to deal with the damage that had been done over the prior 4 years, and so that's where you have all these criminals that were allowed into our state, into our country unchecked, and so that now we're having to do things such as, pass bills and constitutional amendments that gives, courts and judges the ability to deny bail, for example. That's something that, where you have someone that's coming, that's an illegal person, illegal alien that's coming into our United States and specifically into Texas, and creating a 3G offense, which is a, very serious felony offense. We need to be able to deny bail in that situation. And so that's something that it's been very important to me. We passed some of that legislation, still have more to do. And I think as we go forward, we will continue to make sure that we're identifying those individuals, so that, especially the ones that are, committing crimes, that we need to be removing them. They need to be off the streets, and that threat to our public safety needs to be stopped in its track.
That bail thing is something that definitely was good, or is good to look at, because you have certain places in Texas where, you know, they're a little more lenient on things and they kind of wing it. They kind of do what they want. Those kind of getting uniformity there is a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? At least
Yeah, it
it's
really
okay.
is. I mean, because that's you hear about the Soros-funded judges and prosecutors, and in my second session, one of the bills that we passed, I filed HB 17, and the purpose of HB 17 was to rein in rogue DAs, and these were the DAs that were just basically, you're going out and making announcements that I'm not going to, enforce laws that are on this list, and there were a list of the laws that, they were just blanketly stating that they were not going to prosecute. And that's not a prosecutor's role. A prosecutor's role is to look at each case on a case by case basis and make a determination as to whether or not that case should be prosecuted. And so we set up a process to where prosecutors could be removed for not doing their job.
Yeah, I think Florida did something similar too. It's just it's definitely a good thing when you have people kind of they're supposed to be enforcing the law and they start, you know, doing their own thing with that. That's
Yeah, it's
dangerous. It's not a
yeah, yeah. That the buzzwords that we really talked about was that they were putting politics before people. That it should be about public safety. Instead, they were putting their politics ahead of the prosecution.
definitely. Now, one of the things that you dealt with, you said 2021, that was the winter storm, I think it
Sure.
was, when we
Yeah.
had Freeze Mageddon, and there were some issues with, you know, the grid, the operating. There was a bunch of issues, so, a lot deeper than I understand, although I've gotten a little clarity on it throughout the years. But, you know, you've been up there. Tell me, what have you fought for when it comes to the grid? And if you're elected senator, what would you like to see to improve our energy situation, just in energy in Texas in general?
Yeah, great question. Just caveat to that is that yes, my first session was 2021, as we talked about earlier. But not only did we have the storm, but then that was also beginning of that session was we were also dealing with COVID as well. And so my first orientation in the legislature, we were having to test before going into the building each day and things like that. So it was a very strange session for multiple reasons. But yeah, the storm definitely was an enlightening situation for us, to put it mildly. And again, I think it's one of those situations where the state stepped up and has made the necessary improvements so that like with the storm that we just went through last week, we were able to go through it without any concerns on the grid. And it's based upon a lot of the laws that we've already passed. The PUC has done a good job. ERCOT, all of those, regulations and, the makeup of those boards has been changed. At the time I think the chairman was from Minnesota or something like that. So we made a requirement, for example, that those individuals be from Texas so that they're here, boots on the ground, and feel like that we've made the right steps. And there's a concern, a valid concern out there that that the data centers that are coming online throughout Texas, it's both an opportunity on one side, but it's a threat on the other side for different reasons. And so we're having to I think that's something you're going to see a lot of legislation on this upcoming session. And I bring up data centers because obviously the potential for the drain on the grid is there, but I think the technology is going to be there to where instead of a negative impact, it can have a positive impact. And that's,
Right.
I think that you'll see, data centers. I think they're going to happen here. It's a matter of, where are they going to be located and under what regulations are they going to be under? Because I think that's a big part of the problem right now is that the industry has little to no regulation. And there's a reason that, that they're choosing to locate out in the counties where there's very little enforcement opportunities. And so this gives them the ability to, to be good neighbors. That's what, we want to make sure that we pass some reasonable regulations that, wherever these data centers are going to be located, that there are reasonable regulations in place to make sure that the impact to their neighbors are reasonable and that those individuals that have the property have their property rights respected. Obviously, that's a frontier component of being a Texan is we certainly respect one another's property rights, but also we want to make sure that not only the person that wants to locate a data center on their property is able to use their land
So one of the things that when it comes to data centers, since we were talking data centers, one of the concerns is that a lot of their usage is protected through trade secrets. So they don't have to disclose, or they can mask what they're actually using. It's very hard to get what they're actually using because they put it under trade secrets. And I think some of that is federal law. And so, people were concerned about the drainage on that. When it comes to energy and those centers, are you going to look at an all above approach, wind, solar, or do you support more nuclear? Will you look at legislation for that?
Oh yeah, and I think you have to look at all of it. I mean, all with an industry that is as large that data centers are becoming, and the investment that people are making with regard to data centers, we're going to, this is it's kind of like when like urban drilling happened back in, started happening back in 2010, like in the North Texas area. The Barnett Shale was both a challenge and opportunities for homeowners, landowners to utilize the resources that were under their property. But it was also challenging for cities to govern, or for counties for that matter to govern, because you had a new situation that people weren't accustomed to. And that's really what I see. I think it's a good comparison to what you're seeing with the data centers. It's both, like I said before, it's both an opportunity for landowners to utilize highest and best use of their property, but it's also there are major concerns, like you talked about, in lots of different areas that people that are not on the property but are near or adjacent, they're very concerned about what it's going to do, what the impacts will be to their property. And so we just need to make sure, and I've committed to filing a bill that that will have reasonable regulations. And right now I'm brainstorming with folks and just trying to find out what would be some reasonable regulations to impose. And right now I think there's a reason that a lot of these data centers are wanting to locate out in the county, because it's kind of the wild west, and there's not a lot of enforcement opportunities or enforcement authority, I should say, from the county's perspective. And so I think we need to get all the stakeholders involved and conversing, and find out what's the best way to protect the the neighbors of these facilities, and address concerns that are coming. I mean, President Trump has declared this to be be a national emergency issue, and so I think it's not a matter of if, but where these data centers are going to be located. And so if they're going to be anywhere in Senate District 22, I want to make sure that we do everything we can do to protect the citizens that are nearby. And as far as the power question that you asked, I mean, I think we have to look at all of those as opportunities. And I think where we want to land is where, if the data centers are going to be located in Texas, specifically in Senate District 22, make sure that they're off the grid and they're able to get back to the grid when necessary, like when we have a storm like we just recently had, so that they can actually be a positive impact to the grid, not a negative. And of course, water is the other issue, and I think you'll start to see some technology there as well that will lessen the water usage requirements down to what you could see in a typical multi-story office building. So it's that's what I'm being told. I'll hold judgment until I see the proof of that. But right now, we as a community certainly have concerns about water and electricity, and we need to make sure that we get answers to all of those questions for the citizens of SD.
David, the issue you hear almost every time you're in session or just about talking to anybody is property taxes.
Sure.
Property taxes are hurting Texans, and there needs to be funding for things, but also some people are concerned with having to move from, you were in Mansfield your whole life, except for some exceptions. There are people who are in towns their whole life, and now they have to move because they just can't afford the property taxes. What are your thoughts on property taxes, and how will you approach them, if you're elected to Senate?
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. Anywhere I go, that's a topic of discussion, and rightfully so. We've made some progress in the legislature thus far, but not near enough. It's been very frustrating for me as well. I had filed several bills that, that deal with both, on the rate side, which local entities control, and then also on the appraisal side, which is something that the state is charged with. And, so there's lots of room for improvement. I think that the topic is at the top of the list for Governor Abbott at this point. I think he's been specific and intentional with his 5-point plan, and just like last cycle, he was touring around Texas and working on school choice as his primary issue. It's very clear that his primary issue, no pun intended for primary season, but his number one issue, is probably a better way to say it, is certainly, property tax, and more specifically, the school tax, and so I think that, if we all look, if we look and kind of take a deep dive into our tax bill right now, we'll notice, that depending on where you live and what school district and all that kind of stuff, but for the most part, your school district tax is going to make up, anywhere from 55%, even 2/3 of the tax bill. And so if we can take that, that obligation off of our property owners, then, that'll be significant, substantial savings that people are looking at. I mean, we're blessed in Texas not have to pay an income tax, but obviously, continuing to, pay for a home often when your home is paid off, but you're still paying property tax. You feel like you're paying the government to live at your house that you worked hard for and that you paid for yourself. So I think that that's something that, whether you look at Governor Abbott's plan or, also Lieutenant Governor has been talking about the double nickel. I don't know if you've seen that yet or not, but as you've seen over the last few sessions, we've been chipping away at the homestead, not chipping away, but increasing it, I should say. It wasn't that long ago that the homestead exemption in Texas was $25,000. Then it moved to $40,000, and now it's up to $140,000 for the typical homeowner. And then, for someone that's a senior citizen, 65 and older, it's actually $200,000. And so if we can get that number, the closer you get that number to, to $300,000, to where you wouldn't pay any, basically the first $300,000 of your home value would be exempted based on your homestead exemption. That's when you're really going to take some people off the tax rolls. And so what the double nickel plan does, and it's, there's still more to drill down on it, but the big picture is that it lowers that threshold from age 65 down to 55. So now you're even capturing a larger group of people that could be taken off of the tax rolls. And it's, so it's helping the people that, in my opinion, need it the most, which is, a lot of people that are on, that are on fixed income, senior citizens that are on fixed incomes. Giving them the $200,000 exemption is very helpful. And, in my opinion, we need to remove the caps that cities and counties have with regard to homestead exemptions. That was a arbitrary number at some point in time that, said that, the cities and counties, I believe it's 20%, if I remember correctly. But, let's remove that. We always talk about local control, and I'm a big proponent of local control. But so if a county or a city wants to, increase that homestead exemption beyond 20%, then, why not let them? So that's another bill that I intend to file is to remove that cap on the percentage of homestead exemption that, that a city or a county can send.
David, since you touched on it, I want to kind of ask you a question on it. When I speak to the local school districts in Ellis County, when I have them on, there's always issues or concerns about money and how they're going to pay for things. But, that's a normal thing for schools. There's always concern about money. But one of the things that they cite always is the unfunded mandates. There's a lot of mandates that come from the state that the school is required to do this or required to do that, but it doesn't often have money attached to it. What are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on education, and how have you approached that as a legislator? And, if you're elected Senate, as a senator?
Yep. Yeah. Great question. Yeah. What I would say is that over the last, 2 sessions, we have, the increases to pub ed are like never before. There's, it was overdue. I will only say that to begin with. It was overdue because they, had not been receiving increases, but over the last 2 sessions they have. And the budgetary item for, public schools in Texas is $100 billion, $100 billion with a B. And so the commitment from the state is there, but we have to make sure that it's sufficient for all the school districts that are out there. Obviously, school choice was passed this last session, and the budgetary amount there is $1 billion. And so you see that there's a major difference in that. But I think the good part about school choice is it gives kids, not everybody learns the same way, so it gives opportunities. Needs to go to a different school. It gives their parents the opportunity to move his or her child into a better school environment. That's a separate issue. But what I've tried to do is really focus on in working with our superintendents and try to get as much. They want the daily allotment. They want that to be raised as much as possible, and I get that because it gives them the most flexibility. This last session, we took a little bit of a blended approach and raised the allotment, but we also accounted for the ABCs. And so what that was is it gives more flexibility, but it also has them spend it in regards to like transportation and more of the infrastructure side, to where, because there was money allocated specifically for teacher pay raises and addressing other expenditures of the school district, want to make sure that if a school district needed to further more buses or things like that, the essentials, you might say. And so that was another funding approach that came out of this last session. So, I really will want to commit, that I want to work with all of our public schools, myself, my wife, our kids, one granddaughter that's of age. She's 7 and she's in public school as well. I'm a big proponent of public schools, and I want them to be successful, but I also want poor performing public schools to be shut down. I mean, it's, I don't think it's a good thing for, for a student to be, pigeonholed or locked into going to a poor performing school. And so, I want to applaud our, Commissioner of Education that, where he's had to come in and take control of some of the larger districts like Houston and now Fort Worth, and what has the Board of Managers has done down in Houston is caused major improvement in the Houston ISD. And I expect nothing less with the takeover that's taking place in Fort Worth ISD. They're working on getting a board of managers in place right now, and I think that anytime there's that type of oversight, I think you're going to see some of these school districts start to correct some of their own problems and really focus on what's going on in the classroom and the bottom line with regard to how their students are performing. And that's at the bottom. At the end of the day, that's the bottom line. It's we need to make sure that we have good performing schools, so that whether a child wants to go to a typical public school or a charter school or a private school, that they have the best learning environment. And to the extent that we can afford it, there's always more requests than you have. But as a legislature, we're going to continue to prioritize those requests best we can based on the dollars available. And I want to make sure that we do everything we can possibly do to make public schools as successful as possible, because that's what's best for Texas. We need to improve our education system. There's no doubt about it. And I do think that's, from the governor's leadership perspective, I think his goal is to improve. I mean, there's lots of room for improvement for public schools in Texas, and I want to be part of that solution.
Yeah, I could speak to you. There's just so many issues. I mean, I could have you here all night. We could talk about issues. Unfortunately, I'm kind of running out of time a little bit, but I do want to get you another question before I start winding down.
Sure.
And, it's one of the things when Ellis County is growing big time.
You bet.
There's a lot going on in Ellis County. And when I speak to local leaders and I have them on the show, they talk about how, they're kind of powerless on some things. There's a lot of stuff that the state controls, and things like when it comes to mud, they have there's very little that the local municipalities can do. TCEQ has an outside power it's a lot of state stuff, and there's a lot of state control. What are your thoughts on, because you were a mayor, what are your thoughts on, local control, bringing back some more local control if you're elected into the Senate?
Yeah, I think it's a key component of Texas. I mean, I think that's what makes up Texas. And, and I do often remind, my colleagues that Texas, there's one Texas, but there's 254 counties in Texas that make up Texas. And there's a ton of cities and towns and other municipal districts throughout Texas that makes up the state of Texas, the 31 million people that we have. but each one is made different based upon the local control of that city or that school district or that county. And so it's in my DNA. I mean, obviously, you can't do what I went through for 12 plus years without having that pride of helping develop the city. And I know that, cities in Ellis County, certainly Midlothian and Waxahachie, to name a couple, are dealing with, a lot of that high growth. And so it makes it even more difficult. You brought up TCEQ, and I do believe that there needs to be more protections for individuals and cities from what the authority that TCEQ currently has. Because right now, I mean, Midlothian and or Waxahachie can do all the planning they want to do. And my guess is they probably have 20-year plans in place that, whether you're talking about water infrastructure, roads, all of those things. I guarantee you they have a 5-year, a 10-year, and a 20-year strategic plan that has been strategically developed over periods of time that's continuously updated. But when you drop in, 5,000 homes just right outside the city limits of, Midlothian and or Waxahachie, and the congruent improvements are not made, that's a problem. I mean, whether you're talking about transportation or water or whatever utility you want to talk about, it's a problem. And we need to make sure that those developers, again, it's, you keep hearing me talk about common sense and good neighbors, but, we've got great developers in Texas, and there's a reason that, Texas is growing by, 12, 13, 1,400 people per day. It's because people like what's going on in Texas and they're moving here for that reason, most of them. And, so we need to make sure that as we grow in a responsible manner. And I think that's best accomplished by, giving the tools to the, in the toolbox to the local elected officials, so that they can, continue to develop. Now, there's obviously some bad actors, in some of the larger cities that not in Ellis County, and we can all guess what cities those are. Houston, what are you talking? Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, some of those cities that sometimes they ruin it for everybody, and so that's, I think, where sometimes you run into some of these unfunded mandates or maybe an over correction. Sometimes it's necessary to make course correction based upon what one of these large cities is doing, but unfortunately, then a very fiscally responsible city like Midlothian or Waxahachie is negatively impacted because of something that happened in San Antonio, for example, or something like that. And so I want to make sure that that we try to add some protections in there, and brackets is bracketing cities from certain restrictions or whatever the law is a tool that that you can use in the legislature. And I certainly want to make sure that if I'm elected to be the next senator of Senate District 22, I want to make sure that that I'm that voice so that we can do what's best for the cities and counties located within SD.
As I close out, I like to give the candidate the last word. Why should the voters, pick you? And I'll let you close out.
Yeah, great. Well, again, first of all, thanks for the invitation to be on here, and thanks for what you do, getting the word out in your local community. Like I tell people, often people ask, well, how can I help? And usually my answer on that is hey, we all have something to offer. Some people would rather write a check, some people would rather make some phone calls, some people, would rather get out and block walk. There's lots of different ways to make an impact, and so I appreciate what you're doing. You're getting the word out and getting an opportunity for people like myself to get our message out. And really what my message would be, to answer your question, DD, is the reason someone should vote for me is because on day one, I would be able to walk into the Senate chamber and begin representing the district with experience. And that experience, whether you're talking about as a staffer, 30 years ago, I worked for former state senator Chris Harris, and I was a full-time staffer in Austin. And so I worked on the green carpet before, and as a staffer, and then worked with Senator Harris until he passed away, which was just over 10 years ago. But he and I became law partners. And so I have that experience as a staffer. I have that experience as a mayor of 12 plus years, and now in my third term in the House. And I have those relationships that are built and can be utilized so that I can pass the bills that are important to Senate District 22. And I can do that on day one because I already have the experience and relationships and the confidence of many others. I mean, obviously, my campaign is endorsed by, President Trump, Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Congressman Elsie in Ellis County on the west side of the district, Congressman Roger Williams, Congressman Craig Goldman. Most of the sheriffs in SD 22 have endorsed our campaigns. I've worked very well with law enforcement. As I mentioned earlier, I serve on criminal jurisprudence. I've had an opportunity over the last 3 sessions to work with those sheriffs on a consistent basis, and I've earned their trust. And with the exception of one sheriff in SD 22 that has some legal issues right now, I've not sought his endorsement, but most all of the sheriffs have endorsed our campaign, and we just we say all that to say this is that those individuals have trust in me based upon the time and experience that we have together and that we've built. And I feel very confident on day one I'll walk in and be able to represent this district with experience, and we'll give it the hard work mentality that's been instilled upon me from my parents from a young age.
Thanks again for coming on. I do appreciate it. Can you stick around after the show real quick?
You bet.